Planes were intended to make the world a smaller place when it comes to travel. Thanks to the creation of aircraft, journeys that used to take days now take a small number of hours. As the world is getting more and more connected, you'd have thought that planes would always have a purpose. But just like everything else, they have a shelf life. One day they'll no longer be needed. And sometimes when that day comes, they get left lying around like forgotten junk. Sometimes that even happens way before the plane has reached retirement age. In February 2018, a Boeing 737 turned up in a field close to a major highway in Bali. Nobody remembered seeing it arrive. Nobody knows how it got there. And nobody came forward to claim it. Everything about the field's unexpected visitor was a complete mystery. Whoever once owned this plane appears to have gone to some extreme lengths to mask its identity. All identifying marks have been removed. The livery has been stripped away, and the apparently unwanted aircraft is totally anonymous. The lack of identification suggests that it might have been a private plane belonging to one of the country's wealthier inhabitants. But that's just speculation. Some locals say that it was bought with the intention of being turned into an unconventional restaurant, but there's no evidence to support that theory either. For a short while, it turned into a tourist attraction, but it's on private land, and the land's owner wasn't keen on visitors. It's been placed under armed guard ever since. There are only 8 consolidated B-24D Liberator planes still in existence anywhere in the world. And we might even be stretching the definition of still in existence by including this abandoned unit on that count. It's in a derelict state, and it's been standing in the open in a field on Alaska Atka Island for the best part of a century. Brigadier General William E. Lind was in the pilot's seat of the plane when it was on weather reconnaissance duty in December 1942. And ironically found himself tangled in a weather front that he hadn't seen coming. Conditions were too bad to allow the Liberator to get to any of Alaska's airfield, and so he had to deliberately bring the plane down in the field before he ran out of fuel. He was lucky. He survived the crash and escaped with a fractured collarbone. The aircraft didn't get off so lightly. It was badly damaged by the impact, and given its remote location and poor condition, a decision was taken to write it off and leave it where it was, rather than attempt to salvage it. The Soviet Union's quest to build an chronoplane that could be adapted for military purposes led to the creation of several prototype aircraft during the 1960s and 1970s. But the best known of all those failed experiments is the Borev VVA-14. Designed by world-renowned Italian engineer Robert Bartini, the idea behind the creation of this plane is that it could take off and land on water, as well as on a conventional runway. The Russians wanted a dynamic plane that could do battle in the air, but also directly attack submarines beneath the waves. Bartini got very, very close to turning that dream into a reality. The Borev VVA-14 worked just fine when it flew from land, but he could never quite get the pontoons to function the way he wanted them to, and so landing on water eluded his grasp. He was still working on the issue in 1974 when he passed away, and he took all of his valuable knowledge with him when he went. With nobody to finish his work, the VVA-14 had to be abandoned. It was never broken down or scrapped, though, and so if you ever want to see it with your own eyes, you'll find it at Russia's Soviet Air Force Museum. If hunting down abandoned aircraft is your thing, then Tucson in Arizona, USA might be the best place in the world for you to go and indulge your hobby. There are over 4,000 planes parked at the city's notorious aircraft boneyard, and some of them have been there since 1940s. Originally known as Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, the facility opened in 1946 as somewhere for the Air Force to store their disused B-29 bombers and C-47 transport planes. It grew from there, and it's still growing today. By the 1990s, the main job of the Boneyard's employees was breaking down and scraping over 300 obsolete B-52 bombers. Today, you'll find F-16 fighter jets and A-10 Thunderbolt, two ground attack jets, also on the site. Some of the planes are here temporarily rather than permanently because the boneyard does renovation and repair work as well as scraping and dismantling. The work can get a little greasy and dirty, but visitors are still welcome. Guided tours are available via booking on the facility's official website. Many planes receive nicknames from the pilots and crew that work in and around them, and those nicknames are usually terms of endearment. This abandoned Curtiss C-46 Commando has the somewhat unflattering nickname of Miss Piggy. It was never intended as an insult, though. It was a reference to the almost unbelievable cargo capacity the plane had. Miss Piggy briefly saw action toward the end of the Second World War in 1945, but after the conflict was over, she returned to her regular cargo and transportation duties out of her base in Canada. It was there, shortly after taking off from Churchill Airport in late 1979, that she encountered a mechanical problem that ended her career. The engine failed, and although the crew tried to get her back to base, she couldn't make it. Miss Piggy came down in rough terrain, and just over a quarter of a mile from where she'd taken off. None of the crew were hurt badly by the unexpected landing, but Miss Piggy was an old plane by then and was damaged beyond repair. She's still there, exactly where she landed, attracting a few curious tourists every year. Here's another aircraft that's better known by its nickname than by its type and class. It's the battered shell of a Lockheed P-38 aircraft, but to hundreds of U.S. Army trainees, it was once known as the Maid of Harlech. The Air Force was performing training exercises in the country of Wales and the United Kingdom during the Second World War, when an inexperienced trainee pilot, Lieutenant Robert Elliott, found himself in the pilot's seat. Robert couldn't keep the plane under control and crashed it close to the water on the coastline of Gwynedd, a place that's well known locally for treacherous currents and shifting sands. The young lieutenant escaped the wreck safely, but the Maid of Harlech was claimed by the tide before anyone could salvage it. She stayed hidden under the layers of sand until 2014, when she finally resurfaced after a storm. She'll never fly again, but the last news we heard on her was that the International Group of Historic Aircraft Recovery is trying to have her extracted from the beach and transported to a museum for public display. We've seen and heard of many old planes all over the world being converted into bars, hotels, and restaurants after they've reached the retirement age, but we've never seen one as quirky and well executed as this Boeing 727 Treetop Hotel in Costa Rica. You'll never spend a night in more unusual surroundings, but it will cost you $500 to find out what it's like. Only the external shell of the 1965 727 remains from the original fixtures and fittings of the plane. Inside, everything's been ripped out, replaced, and converted into a luxury living space with wooden panels, making the best possible use of the internal dimensions. It's a two-room suite fitted with the authentic Costa Rican teak, and each bedroom comes with its own kitchenette, balcony, and dining area. The whole thing is balanced on top of a pedestal 50 feet above the jungle floor and offers a panoramic view of Costa Rica's natural beauty. Is this somewhere you'd like to stay? Pan America's first ever Boeing 747 jumbo jet has had a long and distinguished career. It's been more than just a transatlantic carrier. When its flying days were over, it had a second career as a restaurant. Now that too has come to an end, and the old plane seems to have been forgotten and left to rust and rot in Namyangju, South Korea. As this was the first commercial 747 ever built by Boeing, it really ought to be in a museum alongside other historic aircraft. But that doesn't seem to be a likely outcome to its current predicament. The plane, named Juan T. Tripe after the man who founded Pan Am, was shipped to South Korea from Southern California in the year 2000 to private investors who ripped out its innards and invited wealthy citizens in to fine and strange surroundings. The business has long since failed. The owners have failed to take into account that it would need a barrel of oil every day to keep the heating working, and that ruined their profit model. They shut down in 2005, and it's been alone ever since. We've seen an aircraft graveyard of sorts in Tucson, Arizona already in this video. Now, here's another one on the other side of the world. It's Thailand's Bangkok Airplane Graveyard. There's a little more to this site than meets the eye. When you first find it, right next to an auto body shop, the fuselage of the 747 and its accompanying pair of MD-82 planes look beaten up and forgotten, but they're actually somebody's home. They've been there since 2010, and they've since been joined by another 747 to expand the developing site. 3 families have moved into the shells of the planes and also offer tourists a guided tour of the site and the interiors of the planes for a small fee. For them, these old wrecks are a source of both income and shelter. The land is technically private property, but it's thought that the owner turns a blind eye to the existence of the graveyard as long as the families don't cause any trouble. In 2004, a long-standing French mystery was solved, or partially solved at least. Celebrated French author Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, known across Europe as the author of The Little Prince, was something of an eccentric man. He was as skilled as an adventurer and an explorer as he was a writer, and so when he went missing for a few days after taking a flight in his privately owned Lockheed P-38 Lightning in July 1944, nobody thought it was strange. It was only after weeks turned into months, and there was still no sign of him, that his friends started to wonder whether he was coming back. He never did. He told people that he intended to take aerial photographs of the French coast, but without a clear location, rescue parties didn't even know where to look. Sightings of him were reported all over the world for many years. But all of those sightings must have been false. The wreck of the Lockheed was finally found off the coast of Marseille in April 2004. While we now know what happened to Saint-Exupéry, we'll probably never know what caused the crash. In October 2019, a shattered and abandoned plane was found on the border of Belize in Quintana Roo in Mexico. It had clearly crash-landed, and the force of the impact was so great that the aircraft had been cleaved into 2 halves. At first, authorities were puzzled. There hadn't been any reports of a plane crash in the previous night or that morning. It didn't take them long to deduce what had happened, though. It appeared that the Gulfstream G550 had been attempting to land on a makeshift runway in a nearby field, and so it was likely to be performing clandestine or illicit duties. More specifically, it's highly probable that this plane was being used to transport drugs. As nobody was found at the scene, and there was nobody in a hospital with any injuries consistent with a plane crash, it's likely that the crew survived, staggering out of the crash, and took their cargo with them before fleeing the scene. The wrecked plane was impounded, but unsurprisingly nobody ever came forward to collect it. Insurance doesn't tend to pay for planes making illegal flights like this. The wreck of the Pegasus has been embedded in snow and ice on the end of a runway in the Antarctic for such a long time that the whole airfield has been named in her honor. The long-tenured C-121 Lockheed Constellation plane was on its way into land at McMurdo Station in October 1970, but it encountered poor visibility and high winds on its way in. Despite the crew doing everything they could to bring her into land safely, she skidded off the icy runway and slammed into a mound of snow and ice. The snow absorbed the bulk of the force, meaning that nobody aboard the Pegasus was hurt, but the fuselage was badly damaged, and the landing gear was ripped away by the force of the crash. In its battered state, it was immediately clear that the Pegasus had come into land for the last time. because the cold has preserved her so well. She still looks like she only came into land last week. Planes that come into land at McMurdo Station's Pegasus Airfield today use the wreck as a landmark and will probably still be doing so 50 years from now. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.